Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Janelle Esparza. I'm head of education. Thank you. That's so sweet. Thank you so much. I'm proud to be head of education at the McNay. And on behalf of Matthew McClendon, our director and CEO, who couldn't be here tonight, I'd like to welcome everybody to the McNay for this Latinx art talk. Let's see, did I miss anything? Yes. I'd like to begin with a brief land acknowledgement. The McNay acknowledges with respect the San Antonio River as Yanaguana, or spirit waters in Pajalate, as the source of life for the city. We acknowledge this place, known as San Antonio, as the traditional homeland of many Native American peoples who are called Coahuitecan in Spanish records, but consist of 200 tribes, bands, clans, and groups known as the Payaya, Auteca, Paguame, Jarame, Pompopa, and Borrado, among other Aboriginal peoples, who continue their traditions today. So thank you so much again for being here tonight. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There will be a Q&A portion after the talk. And so you'll notice to the left and right sides of these aisles, there are 2 microphones ready to go. So if you are able to leave your seat and come out into the aisle to approach the mic, please do. But if you're unable to do so, you just raise your hand and we'll make sure that mic gets right over to you. So now I'm just going to take a minute to briefly introduce our 2 speakers here tonight. We have Mia Lopez and Dr. Tomás Ybarra-Frausto. Mia Lopez is the inaugural curator of Latinx art at the McNay. She's worked with artists and leading contemporary art institutions across the United States for over 15 years. She received her BA from Rice University and a dual master's in art history and arts administration from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Mia has previously held curatorial positions at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis and the DePaul Art Museum in Chicago. She is an alum of the Smithsonian Latino Museum Studies Program and the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture Leadership Institute. Much of her career has focused on Latinx art, as she has been driven by a passion for expanding awareness and engagement with Latinx artists. She is a San Antonio native who truly loves this city. And for Dr. Tomás, yes. Now for Tomás Ybarra-Frausto, who we're going to hear much more from tonight. He's an independent scholar of Latin American and U.S. Latino arts and culture. He was formerly the Associate Director of Creativity and Culture at the Rockefeller Foundation in New York. Prior to joining the Rockefeller Foundation, he was a tenured professor at Stanford University in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. In 2007, the Mexican government bestowed the Order of the Aztec Eagle on Dr. Ybarra-Frausto, citing his life work in fostering cultural understanding between the United States and Mexico through the arts and humanities. Yes. Tonight, we're so honored to hear directly from Tomás on his humble beginnings, early days in San Antonio, and his remarkable journey up until today. Everyone, please join me in thanking my good friends, welcoming him tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for that gracious welcome, Janelle. I'm so honored to be in conversation with one of my, academic, scholarly, just life heroes, Dr. Tomás Ybarra-Frausto, not only tonight, but really for some time, and especially these last few months, I have had the distinct pleasure of revisiting all things Rasquachismo with Dr. Ybarra-Frausto as we anticipate an exhibition that I have been organizing here at the McNay opening next month. And before we get to Rasquachismo, I thought it was really important to have a conversation with Tomás about his beginning, because as you will see, really this unique cultural and aesthetic perspective that he has was, like him, born and raised here in Central Texas. So we'll hear about everything that you have experienced that shaped who you are and the brilliant mind that you bring to us and share with the community. So let's go back to the very early days. Where were you born, Tomás?
Well, I was born, I have to took my notes because I was born on a cold winter morning on December 22nd, 1938, in my grandfather's Rancho de Algodón, a cotton ranch outside of a German-speaking town of New Braunfels, Texas. I was 5 when my parents moved to San Antonio. Now maybe we can see some slides of them. These are some of my ancestors. This is
So his grandparents and great-grandmother.
my grandfather on the left, Don Francisco Ybarra, and his wife, Doña Juanita Ramirez. And they are pictured with my grandfather's, she's my great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother. So my grandfather, his wife, and my grandfather's mother. These are sort of my ancestors in New Braunfels. Next. And these are, again, my paternal and my maternal grandfather. At the center is Don Francisco Ybarra. He is my paternal grandfather. And on the right is Don Remedios Frausto, my mother's, my paternal grandfather. And on the left is Señor Cárdenas, a friend of theirs. This was taken in New Braunfels around the turn of the century. So again, the middle is my paternal grandfather. On the right is my maternal grandfather and Don Señor Cárdenas, a friend of theirs. Okay.
Tomás, what can you tell me about how this image of your parents was taken?
This is on a wedding picture of my dad, Nicolás Ybarra, and my mother, Libertad Frausto. And it was interesting because I chose to show not only their picture, but a tradition of handicrafts in Texas and in Mexico. This is called a fotoescultura, a photo sculpture. The people would send their pictures, send them away to Monterrey or to craftsmen here in San Antonio, and they would they would cut out a base for it and then put the picture over it. So you have like un retrato abultado, a picture that's sort of like a sculpture and as well as a photograph. So this tradition of fotoesculturas was very prevalent here in San Antonio and the Southwest. You could go down on Houston Street where there were a lot of photographic stores, and you would see a lot of these fotoesculturas. So I thought it was interesting. In this case, because it's a wedding picture, the person who made it into a heart, a corazón. And so my dad and my mom are enclosed in the heart of their love. And my mother, they would put little, my mother's part of her wedding veil is part of the photograph. It was embedded into the photograph. And my dad has an embedded like handkerchief, a little boutonniere that was part of his wedding outfit. So it was, I just thought it was interesting, this tradition of fotoesculturas. It doesn't happen in the Anglo community. There's no tradition of sculpture and photographs.
That's really beautiful. And do you remember where in your home this was displayed? Do Do you remember where in your childhood home this was displayed? Like what part of the house?
It was in the living room.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of begin the conversation with was some of the early, visual influences that you grew up with, by virtue of being here in San Antonio, and the proximity to Mexico, both geographically, but then also within your own family history.
Well, San Antonio to me, I thought that I would begin by reading a popular Mexican song that says, I'm paraphrasing it, but it says, San Antonio, lindo y querido, si muero lejos de ti, que digan que estoy dormido y que me traigan a ti. San Antonio, beautiful and beloved, if I die far away from you, let them say that I am asleep and bring me back to you. So I felt that, this was appropriate because this is how I feel about this hometown of mine, San Antonio. This wonderful, because when you love a person, it's also like when you love a city. You have to be captivated by its changing moods, its eccentricities, and its complex temperament. And so, when I grew up in San Antonio, in this wonderful place that is a continuum of cultures, German, French, Belgian, Mexican, Afro-American, and all these cultures create this sort of cosmopolitan city that is a city that I grew up in the 1940s. The mid-1940s were a period of optimism, hope, and shared aspirations in San Antonio. World War II had converted the city into a strategic military training ground for 4 Army bases, Brooks, Fort Sam Houston, Kelly, and Randolph Field. These government installations employed large numbers of Mexican Americans, with a significant number of women joining the labor force. Within the Mexicano community, a new sense of identity stressed being American, speaking English, and participating more vigorously in the civil society. Collective struggles for social justice and equity gathered force, focus on ending discrimination in education, and the forging of a communal and more forceful political voice in local politics. This thrust towards Americanization, however, was not predicated on the idea of total assimilation into mainstream culture. Unlike many previous immigrant groups in the country, Mexicano communities in San Antonio have historically resisted the total abandonment of their ancestral Mexican heritage. Long-established barrios and cultural institutions define a complex Mexican-American universe. And this complex Mexican-American universe, for example, all the Mexican traditions, like Dia de Muertos, as you see here, the image the image that we all know of Jose Guadalupe Posada, la Calavera Catrina. The Day of the Dead was celebrated. It's a celebration of life, and throughout San Antonio on November 1st and 2nd, we just went through this. It's a remembrance of ancestors and their particular cultural traditions that go with it. Pan de Muertos, the creating of ofrendas with your family and so on. It's just one of the most of the traditions that I grew up with in San Antonio have to do with the Catholic Church. Each of the celebrations, Easter, Christmas, the Day of the Dead, each has its particular food, its particular ornamentation, its particular way of being. So this cultural universe of multiple cultures was what I grew up with in the 1940s in San Antonio.
So you had asked that we include this image, and you shared something really interesting with me that I was previously unaware of about some of the history of the debutantes and a cross-cultural celebration that they participated in. Can you share that with the audience?
Yes, in the 1940s, a lot of people were coming from different regions in Mexico, and so they organized themselves into like associations having to do with the different places they came from. So there was a Club Michoacano, a Club Jalisciense, a club from the different states in Mexico. And so every year they had this ball. I'm showing that the class structure of San Antonio was not only working class, which is where I come from, with all the traditions that working class communities had, but there was also an incipient middle class. And it was this middle class, it was the entrepreneurs that came from Mexico that established these social clubs related to the region that they came from. And so every year they had this big ball. It was called El Baile Blanco y Negro, the black and white ball, because all the debutantes wore white and all the guys wore frocks, tuxedos. And so it just shows that the class structure in San Antonio was only not one kind, but it was very diverse. And so these people brought in the particular traditions from their particular cultures in Mexico, the particular states that they came from. So part of the debutante ball, at the beginning, the women would all come dressed in a traditional outfits from their communities. So you had the huipiles from one nation, the sarapes from another, whatever they would wear, all the women would come first. And then at the end of the ball, they would then change into their formal gowns and they would dance with, it was also a way of creating, the guys would dance with different women, and pretty soon they were married. So it established a complex social relationship of a middle class San Antonio. And so I just wanted to share that this, although we were working class and had all the particular traditions of Dia de Muertos, Easter, and so on, there was also another group that intertwined and intermixed with the community. I brought this because when I was growing up, the Alameda was one of the important regions where I got I wrote something about the Alameda.
Well, something that came to mind, and maybe we can start talking about this a little bit, was this concept, as we've been in conversation around the scholarship that you have done and some of your earliest influences, there is a beautiful phrase that you use that I think really encapsulates so much of it, and it's la casa, la calle, y la comunidad. And I'm wondering if this is part of that kind of notion for you in terms of the home, the street, the community as being sources of influence. I think you call them nutrient sources.
Yes, the theater was very important for me. A lot of my ideas came from watching La Tandas de Variedad, these skits that people would have. And I would go when the Teatro Alameda, I wrote an essay called The Palace of Dreams. The Alameda was not only an institution, it was a place where people could dream because we saw movies from the Mexican Golden Age. And so I grew up with Maria Felix, Pedro Infante, a lot of the stars of that wonderful period, but also the movies that we saw in the Alameda. The Alameda was a luxurious palace. It had even a daycare center for kids. So when you came, the parents could leave their children downstairs with trained nurses, and they could then go upstairs and watch the movie, and all of it for the price of a ticket at the Alameda. It was a very luxurious theater, and I grew up seeing all these movies of the Mexican Golden Age. And it's, again, I saw the luxurious Mexico City in the 1940s, 1950s, the glamour of Mexico City, the women in their furs, the men in their frocks, but also the stories of the indigenous communities in Mexico, the way they were moving from their indigenous communities into the big city, and the struggles that they had, very much like a lot of the struggles that were going on in San Antonio with people that were just recently arriving into this big cosmopolitan city, and they were coming from ranchos and communities. So the movies were very important to me as a source of inspiration, but also not only the movies from Mexico, but also here there were traditions of theater. I was very impressed with it. I'm not an actor, but I'm going to show you every time I give a talk, I present this skit because I remember it in my head. So there's these two compadres, and I'm sitting there. This is at the Teatro Zaragoza on Houston Street, and I'm like 14 years old, and I'm seeing this. And so it was very simple. You had on the stage a place that was called La Calle, the street. Another place was called El Restaurante, the restaurant. And it was very simple. A sign that said, the street, Zaragoza, Calle Zaragoza, Restaurante. And in the restaurant, they had a table and a chair. And the people wore a sign that said, recién llegado, recently arrived. And the other one was acomodado, a person who's been here a while. This is important because later on, the Teatro Campesino is going to use some of these traditions. It's the way that traditions evolve in our community. So anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm watching, it's bilingual, and this is where a lot of Rasquachismo ideas came from. So there's two compadres that meet. And so you have one compadre here, and he meets the other one and says, compadre, hi, compadre. I'm so glad you're here, compadre. This is the one that says, remember, there's two people, two characters. The recently arrived, el recién llegado, and the acomodado, the person who's been here a while. So they meet, and so the person who's just arrived from Mexico meets, says, compadre, ay, compadre, I'm so glad to meet you, compadre. I want to learn English, compadre. I want, teach me English so I just came to the United States. Quiero hablar inglés. And please help me. He says, don't worry. Just go to a restaurant. Yeah, and you go to a restaurant and you say, I want a cup of coffee and cake. Y ya verás. A cup of coffee and cake. Cup of coffee and cake. So he goes to the restaurant. A waitress comes in. Good morning. Buenos días, señorita. May I help you? A cup of coffee and cake. Oh, sure, I'll give you a cup of coffee and cake. So she brings him a cup of coffee and cake. And he's saying, boy, you're watching me acting it out. I'm not a good actor. This cup of coffee and cake is so good. They meet again 2 weeks later. Ay, compadre, I'm so glad you came to see. I'm so glad I've seen you again, compadre. I'm learning English already. Cup of coffee and cake, compadre. But I'm sick and tired of eating cup of coffee and cake. He says, I have a cup of coffee and cake in la mañana. I have a cup of coffee and cake in la mediodía. I have a cup of cake at night. Enséñame otra cosa. Well, don't worry. Now when you go in, you say, ham sandwich. Okay, so it comes in. Ham sandwich. Again, good morning. Buenos días, señorita. I speak English already. Oh, yes, may I help you? What would you like? Here's a menu. He says, no, I already, no quiero un menú, nomás quiero que me diga que me traiga un ham sandwich. Sure, sir, right away. Here's a ham sandwich. Oh, she said, by the way, do you want it on toast? Do you want it on fried bread? Do you want it on a tortilla? Do you want mayonnaise? Do you want a cup of coffee and cake? And just as you laughed, so did the people in the audience, because they were all learning how to go from a cup of coffee and cake to a ham sandwich. And so, the Teatro Alameda not only was the films showing, what I'm suggesting is that a lot of us, since a lot of this was not taught in the schools, the history of Mexico, the pre-Columbian history of Mexico, the different classes in Mexico, we were just learning it from the movies. And that's how I learned, that our community was complex and had many worldviews, not only one particular view, because people came from different regions. We were all mestizos, but mestizos meant that they were mestizos of different sorts. Just like when you saw the picture of my grandfather had green eyes, and he was a Basque, and he had a Basque Spanish dictionary, even when I was growing up. And then, so this mixture and mestizaje was part of the intellectual ideals of that particular period. We were all mestizos, but we were all mestizos of a different sort.
Thank you so much for that reenactment. We'll see some other images that will show that Tomás's theatrical talents have actually been around for some time. So I'm going to step in here and say that we have an incredible story that was recorded earlier this year of Tomás talking at length about his time here at the McNay as a young man. But I was hoping that you could at least touch a little bit, for those who have yet to see that interview. Tell us when you came to the McNay, how you arrived here and what happened once you got here.
Well, I was in high school one day. Now, I went to Breckenridge High School in San Antonio. At this time, I was maybe like 14, 15 years old. There were two college prep schools. One was Jefferson High School, Alamo Heights High School, and Breckenridge High School. And I decided, I already knew I was going to college. My parents had instilled this notion of education. Education was really significant for our community. It has always been important. I remember my father saying, una persona educada es lo más importante, hijito. It's the most important thing. Porque si haces mucho dinero, viene alguien y te lo puede robar. If you just become entrepreneur and make a lot of money, somebody can come in, or you can lose it all, or somebody can steal it from you. But if you get educated, nobody can take it away from you. That's in your head. And to be educated is to be a citizen. And so to be a citizen is to enter this world. Education is a world of books. It's a world of traditions. It's a world also of the ordinary, the stories that we tell around the kitchen table. And so I wanted to be very much educated. And so I knew I was going to college. So I went to Breckenridge High School. And so when I was going to Breckenridge High School, this is a story of me and the McNay. I was going to Breckenridge High School, and one day in the high school newspaper, there was an ad that said, person wanting to learn Spanish. And so I applied. And the person putting the ad was the wife of Adja Yonkers. And Adja Yonkers was a Latvian artist who, as you might know, spent some time right here at the museum. Tell a little about, do you know about that?
I know some of it, but I would prefer to hear your version of it. I mean, it's an artist who was here at the McNay, and my understanding is that you came to assist with teaching this person who was in residence here Spanish, and that really became kind of a mutual education in a way, because little did they know that the person that would be teaching them the lessons was also incredibly intelligent and interested in what was happening at the McNay and the galleries.
Yes, the Mrs. Junkers, who brought me to the McNay, she was a wife of Adja Junkers, who was teaching here at the McNay at the art school. And so I was like in high school, and I began learning by coming to the McNay and seeing the exhibitions. I began learning. I saw my first Diego Rivera here which is still here.
Yes.
And so also at the McNay, I began understanding what art was all about. And they had a wonderful library of European books and Mexican. They had books on the Mexican Revolution, books on the Mexican muralists. And so I began learning by myself, an autodidactico. I learned about culture and art in Mexico. And when I came to the McNay, I saw a lot of the McNay collection of indigenous communities from the Southwest. They have a huge collection of santos. Those are religious objects from New Mexico. They had New Mexican weavings. And so I began learning that there was a tradition of culture that was already here in San Antonio. And I would bring people I was like a docent. I would bring people and I would show them, this santo means this whatever, because I was reading and learning by a mutual understanding. Can we see the next slide?
Yes.
Also at the McNay, this is a time when a very important book came out. It was called Mexican American Artists, which is still a very basic book for learning about the Mexican American community. But in the cover, the artist that's in the cover, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it was an artist from Del Rio, Texas, and her name is Chelo Consuelo Amezcua. Chelo Amezcua. And so I began, Chelo Amezcua had a first exhibition here at the McNay. John Palmer Leeper was a director. Amy Freeman Lee was a very important art critic. And I would come and listen to her lectures. And one lecture she gave was on Chelo Amezcua. And I fell in love with her. As you can see, Chelo Amezcua, I consider her now a sort of a Rasquachi artist because she drew with fountain pens, and she drew on the cardboard of the shirts that people sent to the laundry. She would save the cardboard, and then she would draw. In intellectual terms, she was called an outsider artist, or the way she painted. When I met her, I went to visit her after reading about her in Jacinto Quirarte's important, significant book. Jacinto Quirarte went throughout the U.S. and meeting Mexican-American artists in Texas, New Mexico, California, and he was the first person that put together this compendium of ideas and began laying the groundwork for what became Chicano art. And so Chelo Amezcua became one person that I really liked. I went to visit her in her home, and she said, she was a very interesting person. She said her art was, she said, every night when I wake up in the morning, I have these dreams. I dream about Netzahualcoyotl, who was a very famous Mexican poet, pre-Columbian poet. And so she would wake up and then she would draw her interpretation of Netzahualcoyotl. And so a lot of people call her a surrealist artist because her work was otherworldly about things that she had dreamed, an oniric artist. And she would talk about how she saw this, and she would draw them with little tiny things. She called this Tejano filigree, is her concept for the art. So anyway, I saw the art at the McNay, and this is how I became interested in the collection of the McNay. With their particular, I began learning about the Southwest art in the McNay and the 2 or 3 artists that were shown at the Whitty Museum, which was the other museum at the time. For example, next.
I think the next slide is a fun one, actually. So this is you with some friends. Perhaps you had just been visiting one of the museums. And is that you? Are you doing a little spitball with the with the straw?
This is me during my high school years.
Yes.
And
Love that.
it was a hangout for teenagers. It was called Earl Abel's. At Brackenridge High School, when I was coming to the McNay, I was a pretty popular guy. I was on the. You have pictures of me?
Well, there's that one, yeah. I think this is the best one we have in this presentation, but we can do a whole other one day. Of just, yes.
Well, a little bit about my high school. When I graduated, there were 300 graduates, and out of those 300, there were like about 20 Mexicanos, Mexican Americans. So at the high school,
20.
we organized a club called Club Estrella, and what the Club Estrella was a place where we would meet, and we petitioned, and so one day a week we had Mexican food for the high school, for everybody in the cafeteria. We brought in scholars to talk about the incipient idea of Mexico and the Mexican Revolution and so on. We participated as high school students. We went around and visited a community and talked. We were mainly, the ones in high school were mainly middle-class Mexicanos and working class. And so we exchanged ideas. We would have meetings, and I began learning that our community was very complex. We had artists that were, that did the decorations for the bailes that we had. We brought in Mexican musicians and so on to keep alive our culture in San Antonio. And this idea of the community working together to create a sense of continuity in culture was what we did in the high school. So I was growing up, as always, between two worlds, the Anglo world and the Mexican world. Earl Abels, all my Anglo friends were there. They were very good friends, but they were, Anglo, and we had the Mexican community also that had the club and so on. So we were learning from each other as a bicultural community.
So you also had included this image, and I know this jumps ahead to sort of after your college years. We have a few photos of that. Do we want to look at those and then maybe come back to this?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So another, important influence. So we're jumping ahead to your college and graduate school years. You talk about that bicultural influence, but you also mentioned essentially early forms of organizing when you were in high school. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your involvement with the Chicano movement. What you were experiencing as a student and then eventually as a professor on these campuses.
As you know, the Chicano movement circa mid-1960s was a transformative moment for the Mexican community in the United States. We have two images here of two of the significant. I picked one was Cesar Chavez, who organized the farm workers. And this experience of being a farm worker, an agricultural worker, was an experience that was shared by many, many communities across the United States. And so the idea of organizing the community, and Cesar Chavez used a lot of cultural information in organizing. They were called, the marches were called pilgrimages. It was a pilgrimage of, like, they carried the Virgin of Guadalupe, the mother of the Mexicanos, and they sang the songs of Mexico, of the Mexican Revolution, because they were saying, just like the people in Mexico created a revolution and transformed the society, so we, the poor, the underpaid, the workers in the community, are going to have a revolution. It's like a flame that is now united all over the country. And so people responded to this, and there were marches and songs, and this is a cohort that I came to when I was in graduate school in Washington State, when the farm workers were there also organizing. And it's a picture of me in Washington State. Since I had worked in the theater, and I had known about the Rasquachismo thing, I started organizing this theater group. It was called El Teatro del Piojo. Piojo is lies. And lies, the reason was, one of the things that Chicano movement did was to take things that were negative about the community and turn them upside down, turn them into positive things. So when I was young in elementary school, a lot of the teachers would come and expulgar the kids. You know, they would take two pencils and they would go through your hair, and if you had lice in your hair, they would put a little powder. And so when you went out on the playground, nobody would play with you because you were, you know, you were, you know, you had piojos. You were a piojoso. So when I decided to name my theater, I called it El Teatro del Piojo because it was, again, and if you can see the Teatro del Piojo, so I used a tradition of San Antonio, the skits like the one I showed you, and made little skits, but had to do with farm workers and their and their struggles, the same way that Cesar Chavez was working in California. And here's me. Now you can go back to the other one.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, the next one.
No.
Yeah.
Do you want to go this way?
The next one. No, before then.
This one?
Okay. Again, the Cesar Chavez, and Dolores Huerta, the people that organized the farm workers community. And on the left is a picture, a print by Malaquías Montoya that says, "Yo soy Chicano." The word Chicano was becoming to be prevalent, and it was this word that the Chicano movement organized, and there were artists, many artists of different kinds, of different vocabularies that became involved. And Malaquías Montoya is one of the early significant artists of that particular moment.
Okay.
And here I was. This in the farm worker community of Yakima Valley in Washington State. We organized this little escuelita, this little place where the community could come and learn, but the teachers were not. We brought in university professors and graduate students. Antonia Castañeda, who is a very important historian, is right here, and is one of my oldest friends. We worked together and we established this little escuelita in the Yakima Valley, but we didn't have the college university teachers. We felt that it was the community. We found a señora who knew how to weave. We found a señor who knew how to play the guitar. We found another señor who recited poetry very beautifully, and they became the teachers of the community. The kids would go to school, the regular school, but then they would have a day or a place where they would come after school and they would have classes about their own culture, because none of this was taught in the school. And so again, it's just by way of showing, this is me. I had always collected Mexican art, Mexican folk art, because I couldn't have enough money to buy Mexican art. I bought just folk art. And so I used my collection, and we made a little museum in an abandoned schoolhouse. So the community had a museum of their own. And again, the essential thing is that el corazón of the community, the heart of the community, is how they express themselves through songs, through music, and we established this escuelita.
I love how that foreshadows the many different museum initiatives that you would be involved with throughout your career. And I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because we still have a lot of ground to cover. You've done a lot, Tomás, and you have so many great stories. I'm like, okay, we could sit here all night, but let's see what we have next. Okay, I'm going to move. So one of the impetus is for this conversation this evening was the entire concept of Rasquachismo. 35 years ago, in 1989, you wrote this essay all about this uniquely Chicano aesthetic that started here in San Antonio, is the way that you sort of framed that idea. And we just have here some images, sort of exemplifying maybe some of the influences that were around you. But I was hoping that maybe you could share a little bit about the way that Rasquachismo started in San Antonio as an idea for you.
Well, it started with me, first of all, going around and seeing the way that people lived, how they ornamented their house, how they ornamented la casa, la calle en la comunidad, how in the house women had domestic altars, and I would listen and learn about what a domestic altar was like. It was not only a religious space, a space for contemplation and prayer, but it was also an altar had photographs of the family and pictures of the family and mementos of important days in the family. And so the altar became a kind of like a narrative of a particular family. And so artists like Amalia Mesa Baines, and I hope you go see her exhibit at SAMA right now, she took this idea of the altar and made it into installations for museums. But essentially the altar was this place of contemplation, but also a place where it was a narrative, a community narrative of the high points of that community. And if you visited different altares, you would see different communities and different ideas of that community and that family. And in San Antonio, here's a señora, and she's surrounded by flowers in her own garden.
Tin cans.
And tin cans. And so it's again, I began thinking, well, the love of flowers and gardening is very important. She doesn't have enough money to buy pots, so she just puts tin cans. But she's very surrounded by them. And I began thinking how beautiful. She is making a space for nature and culture, all of her own, in her own self-expression.
I'm something that I was really struck by in some of our early conversations. You talked about learning about Mexican culture and history at a very early age from the calendars that your mom would display in your home, and specifically, learning about some of the stories tied to Aztec and Mayan history and culture and myth, like Ixtaquehuatl and Popocatépetl, seeing these representations. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that too, those histories that you accessed really through popular culture and through these printed materials.
Well, one of the ways we learn, and it continues to be very important for me, when you learn about art, not only do you learn visually, but you learn orally. Because when we were kids, the way we learned about things is, my mother had all these calendars. In Mexico and in San Antonio and in many places of Spanish-speaking communities, at the end of every year, the businesses that you participate, the bakery that you went to, or the place where you brought food, they gave you a calendar, and the calendar usually was a picture of the Virgen de Guadalupe, or a picture of charros, or a picture of Mexican cowboys, or different kinds of pictures of Mexican culture. Well, for example, when I saw the Virgen de Guadalupe, as a boy, 6 or 7 or 8 years old, I didn't know who it was, and so I said, Mama, ¿quién es esa señora? Why do you have that lady here? And then my mother would say, and then she would tell me the story. Es la Virgen de Guadalupe. And this is one day, and usually the calendar had the Virgen and Juan Diego. And it's a story. She would say, and one day, it was December, it was very cold, and this indigenous man went up there, and all of a sudden, there's this wonderful, beautiful lady, and she has a golden mandrola, coming out of her. And she is the mother, she was La Virgen de Guadalupe, and he was Juan Diego. And she said, and the Virgin appeared in this pre-Columbian site where an indigenous image had always been. And so she was telling me, I was learning by seeing the picture, but also by hearing the story. And I think this is very important. This image here is one of the important images of one of many, many important myths of Popocatépetl and Ixtaquehuatl. Essentially, it's the eternal story, the Romeo and Juliet story, right? There were this guy who was a working class person pre-Columbian, and a person that came from upper class, and they fell in love. But their parents would not allow them to get married because one was a plebeian and the other one was high class. And so the gods took pity on them. And so they she became this volcano called Ixtaccíhuatl. And he became this prince called Popocatépetl. And they are the two volcanoes in Mexico. And so this is a story of the volcanoes of Ixtaccíhuatl and Popocatépetl. And so this tradition came to San Antonio. This is an image that was at Lerma's nightclub, a place where people went to dance with a conjunto and so on. It was on the wall. Again, they were learning, they were contemporary, playing cumbias and boleros, and at the same time surrounded by images reminding them of where they came from and what their ancestry was.
So another phrase that has come up, I think that to me is almost a synonym for Rasquache in the way that you use it, is the barrio baroque. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and also why you wanted to include this image of the interior of Mi Tierra?
Well, even today, many of you have probably visited Mi Tierra restaurant, Mi Tierra Panaderia y Café, a market square. And you go in and you're surrounded by 100 piñatas and 1,000 LED lights and garlands of flowers and lights blinking on and off, and papel picado cut around like a very festive thing. But you look up and you're surrounded. There's pictures of the history of San Antonio, all kinds of photographs. There's a mural about the community leaders in San Antonio. And so all of this together creates this atmosphere of exuberance. And this reminded me from the high art idea of the Baroque, the idea that too much is not enough. You know, the Baroque is not. You want to fill in the space with. There's a thing called horror vacui, that is you're afraid of a vacuum, so you have to fill the vacuum with a lot of things, and you put in one color and another color, and you mix, and it's this mixture of traditions and that flowing around that I think became to me the idea. I began thinking, and in the community, the people would say, ese lugar es muy rascuache, you know, it's not really nice, you know. But the artists began thinking of it as an asset in a positive way.
And so that brings us to this important essay that you wrote that was originally for an art exhibition all about Rasquachismo. And I think you wanted to read a short definition of Rasquachismo. So this is widely available online, and was published in 1989. Through this exhibition that was organized by the Movimiento Artístico del Río Salado, which was actually in Phoenix. But as you'll see in some of the references, to Solo Serve and Big Red, it's definitely a very San Antonio coded text.
Well, I'm reading one particular section from this essay that I wrote, which I think is the essence of the Rasquache aesthetic. I say, vernacular theorizing arises within conditions of scarcity. Aesthetic strategies are derived and encoded in folk sayings, hacer de tripas corazón, making do with what you have. The aim is to recycle materials, often in a new context. Old car tires become shoe soles or ornamental garden containers. Discarded oil drums become barbecue pits. Chicano artists subvert the consumer ethic of mainline culture with strategies of appropriation, reversal, and invention. Rasquachismo is not a style, but more of an attitude of taste. Very generally, Rasquachismo is rooted in resourcefulness and adaptability, yet mindful of stance and style. To be Rasquache is to posit a bawdy, spunky, subversive consciousness. Outsider, outlaw cultures like homosexuals and lesbians, with their refined sense of illusion and transformation, are nutrient sources for a Rasquache sensibility. In the realm of taste, Rasquache is to be unfettered and unrestrained, to favor the elaborate over the simple, the flamboyant over the severe, bright colors giantes or preferred to somber high intensity to low, the shimmering and sparkling over the muted and subdued. Ornamentation and elaboration prevail, joined to a system, a vernacular system of taste that is a combination of the sentimental and the sincere. So this is, as you can see, this is what I tried to project in terms of what you saw at the Mi Tierra. You know, this ornamentation, this elaboration, so on.
Yes. And so as this essay went out into the world, it began to become, and the term in particular really took on a life of its own and continues to influence artists here in San Antonio and beyond. We have, of course, a work, Nuestra Señora de Rasquachismo, by David Zamora Casas, San Antonio artist, featured here. And a more emerging artist, Salvador Jimenez Flores, describes his ceramic practice as Rasquache in the way that he's thinking about resistance, thinking about the creation of these hybrid nopal figures. Of course, another iconic San Antonio work on view for many years at the Museo Alameda was Franco Mondini Ruiz's Salvaged Botanica. And this piece you had wanted to make reference to as another example of the Rasquache sort of aesthetic and ethos. Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, this was taken down, but it was a whole at the Centro Alameda when it was a museum. It showed again the multiplicity of elements that mixed together to form this elaborate. Every space is filled with veladoras, with flowers, with everything. And this was aesthetic of the Rasquachismo.
Yes. And then, as you mentioned earlier, your dear friend and colleague, Amalia Mesa Baines, currently has an outstanding exhibition at the San Antonio Museum of Art. A few years after your essay was published, she wrote an essay of her own, essentially saying yes to everything that you were saying, but also acknowledging that there is a feminist version of Rasquachismo, both feminist and feminine, called Domesticana. And she really centered the home altars, the yard shrines, this intersection of aesthetics and making do with what you have, but also home life and the roles that women have often been relegated to because of patriarchal society.
Go ahead. Another part of my life has been to work. I was, as you mentioned, Associate Director for Arts and Culture at the Rockefeller Foundation. And one of the early, we were trying when I went at the Rockefeller, I wanted to help the community and bring back their traditions. And one of the things was literature. We have always been a literate community, not only because we have the oral traditions, but we have a long tradition of writing. And so we seeded the the recovery project at Houston University here in Texas. And for 30 years, they have been recovering the literature, both written in English and in Spanish, mainly in Spanish. They have graduate students from Cuba working with people from Cuba, universities in Cuba, the United States, Puerto Rico, and they have tried to capture all the writing that they have found to show that we have been a literate community from colonial times to the present. It's an ongoing project. We seeded it, and it's one of the significant things that I feel very proud of. And this is a cover of the latest edition. As you can see just from the picture, the visual image of all the people gives you a generational idea of Chicano literature going way, way back to pre-Columbian times in the different communities of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the United States.
We also wanted to acknowledge the incredible contributions you have made in many ways to the Smithsonian, not the least of which was the contributing to the report Willful Neglect, which essentially documented the many ways that for decades the Smithsonian did not do a very good job of including American Latinos in collections in different roles throughout their entire institution. And the publishing of this report then spurred the creation of the Smithsonian Latino Center, a pan-institutional initiative that now has become the foundation of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Latino, which is slated to open hopefully in the next decade or so. And that's, I think, just a really great testament to the importance of the work that you have done in not only doing the research, but helping to quantify the impact that art can have on communities.
You want to show the picture? Well,
okay.
One of the other things that we began when I was at the Rockefeller Foundation, we began seeding community cultural arts organizations. Communities we have funded in different kinds of ways. For example, the communities here in San Antonio, the cultural community, the community centers, where people in the community not have to go to the museum, but in the community. So we have the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center. We have the Centro Cultural Aztlán. We have CC. We have NALAC. All these organizations. This is a cover of the NALAC, one of their 1992. It was a national conversations that was held in Corpus Christi. And again, it brought artists, Chicano artists from all over the country, and they began defining what a community center in the community should be. Many of the people that are here participated in that conference, and it was a very significant part. So I thought all of this material is found at the San Antonio Public Library. I have been collecting all of this material and have been donating it, so you can find all of this, all the willful neglect from the Smithsonian, the NALAC things. All of this are there for your knowledge about the beginning and the evolution of cultural centers and communities in San Antonio.
Okay. And then we can also, there's many other incredible texts that Tomás has contributed, to the field of Latino studies, Latino arts and culture. These are just, a few of the covers, and some of these we hope to have, here at the museum during the run of our exhibition for everyone's reference. Can you tell me what this is an image of?
Well, this is an image that I'm most proud of in terms of my work. This is the Order of the Aztec Eagle. I was awarded this by the Mexican government for my work in building bridges between the cultural bridges between the United States and Mexico. And I feel very proud because although they have given this Águila Azteca to many people like Mandela and so on, there's only 3 Chicanos that have received it. Cesar Chavez, myself, and another Mexican American. So this is. I told Mia, I don't know, this is turning into a me conversation.
And I said that's exactly as it should be. Tomas continues to receive incredible accolades and very special honors. Our very own San Antonio artist, Cruz Ortiz, has this incredible portrait of Tomas that is now on view in the National Portrait Gallery. And I guarantee you will be hearing more from Tomas in the galleries and through our website and through our apps as we open the exhibition Rasquachismo, 35 Years of a Chicano Sensibility, really celebrating this influential not only text but idea and concept that he continues to share with our community and really with the world. Thank you so much, Tomas, not only for joining me for this evening, but for this gift, for your ongoing commitment to sharing your knowledge and wisdom and insights with our community, and for being here today.
Thank you, Mia. The next one's slide.
So we are a bit over time, but I think we do have time for a few questions. So if anyone has anything that they are dying to ask, Tomas in particular, please make your way down. We have microphones at either side.
And if anyone is not able to make it down to these microphones and you have a question, please just raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you. Mia? Tomas, with all due respect and great honor, two things I want to have you address because they're missing here. One is a concept that I've heard and that you've addressed is there's a difference between low rasquache and high rasquachismo, number one. And number two, the debate over whether Rasquachismo applies to all Chicano art or not.
Sure. So I can answer the second question right out the gate and say, of course, Rasquachismo does not apply to all Chicano art. It's a specific ethos that I think that Tomás does a wonderful job of kind of expounding on it. But this idea of celebrating, making do with what you have, of course, does not apply to everyone. I think it's really fascinating to see how this conversation continues to evolve. Terminology often is shifting and fluid. And Tomás and I continue to kind of think too about what artists that are making work today perhaps embody this spirit, and those perhaps that do not, and they're doing something completely different, which I think really speaks to the diversity and breadth of the Chicano art community, the Latinx art community, that there are so many different ways of making. So thank you for that question. Tomás, do you want to take on the high and low Rasquachismo?
Well, I had a list and I've forgotten, for example, but mainly the difference between high and low was just like there's, well, for example, high rasquache, low rasquache would be menudo, but high rasquache would be sopapillas. I made a list of all
There's a fantastic list, and again, you're very much a product of its time. I feel like Barbacoa and Big Red was like low, and then like in the middle was like shopping at Solo Serve, but there were different things, and perhaps that's something that we should update for the exhibition. That could be a fun project for us. Yes. Okay. I think we have time for one more question. No questions. Okay. Well, I guess, yes. We left them speechless, Tomás.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So this is such an amazing presentation, and it's such an honor to be here. So I wanted to ask how the concept of Rasquachismo can be applied at a more pan-Latinx and global making do with what you have. I'm coming from the perspective of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, and having grown up with not exactly the same, but with that making do with what you have and finding beauty in it. So I love the idea of expanding it, and I feel this is the term that I was missing from my life.
Thank you so much. How does Rasquachismo? So to paraphrase, the question is, how does a concept like Rasquachismo, which is, originally written within the context of a Chicano culture, how could that possibly be applied to a broader Latinx context, particularly today?
Well, one of the things is that all cultures have a similar concept. For example, the Puerto Rican community, there's a wonderful artist that is also Pepón Osorio, who has taken some of the notions of this Rasquachismo from a Puerto Rican perspective. And there's essays about it in a Cuban perspective. So it seems to be that there's a universal idea of how communities in their own community mix and match and subvert traditional notions with ordinary things that they have around their house. So it's not only a Mexican-American aesthetic, but I think we can posit that it's sort of like a Latino aesthetic as well.
Definitely. And I think as we continue to really address intersectionality in the ways that so often, our cultures have more in common than we may realize, that it's great to kind of see cultures perhaps, respectfully sharing and borrowing these terms. So, Gloria, I think you can go ahead and use Rasquachismo in your work.
I have a question. Tomás, how did you come up with the word Rasquachismo?
Tomás, the question was, how did you come up with the word Rasquachismo?
Because I heard it growing up in San Antonio. People would say, when they saw something that was, for example, when a child would go to school and he said, "Mom, I want to wear this red sock and I want to wear this blue sock." And the mom said, no, you can't do that. He says, "Yeah, but I like that." And so I began thinking that, people have different ways of expressing themselves, and they mix and match. And this mixing and matching is, I think, an important part of how we define ourselves in a particular way. Your own self-image is part of. So I grew up hearing the word rascuache with a community, and so I began thinking, well, what is this thing called rascuache that people talk about it? And I began listening and learning from the community, and that's how I began thinking of the notion. In literature, there was also, it's for example, a very important book called Cuando los Pericos Maman. And it's a story about a person coming from Mexico and coming and learning about the different ways of people, and he would mix and match things and so on. So I began reading and learning from the community itself.
So Rasquache means mix and match? No. What does it mean?
Rasquache means tacky or low brow. Could be a little bit more vulgar than that. It's a little bit almost a slur, I think, depending on the context. It can mean crummy, or you might think of some other synonyms that I won't say on stage. Yes. Great.
What does Rasquache smell like?
Oh. Well, that's. Rasquache. That one perhaps maybe best left to the imagination. Well, thank you all so much for joining us.